The crystalline cube materialized in the observation deck of the International Space Station with a soft blue glow. Dr. Emma Rodriguez had been monitoring deep space radio signals when the artifact simply appeared, floating 3 feet above the main console. The cube pulsed with internal light, casting strange shadows across the cramped workspace. Emma pressed the emergency alert button and stepped back from the impossible object. Within minutes, the entire 6-person crew had gathered around the mysterious cube. Commander Alex Rivera took charge, ordering everyone to maintain safe distance while they attempted to understand what they were dealing with. The cube began projecting a holographic image, a tall, graceful figure with 4 arms and skin that shifted between blue and silver appeared before them. The being spoke in perfect English, though its mouth movements didn't quite match the words. Greetings, inhabitants of the 3rd planet in this solar system. I am Ambassador Quillen of the Galactic Confederation. Your species has demonstrated sufficient technological advancement to warrant inclusion in our alliance. This message contains formal invitation protocols and preliminary cultural exchange data. The hologram continued for 20 minutes, explaining that humanity had been observed for several decades. The Confederation represented over 300 intelligent species across the galaxy. They offered membership, technology sharing, and peaceful cooperation. The process was described as routine and straightforward. Emma recorded everything while the other crew members asked questions that the hologram couldn't answer. The message was clearly pre-recorded, covering basic topics like interstellar law, trade agreements, and diplomatic procedures. It all seemed very official and well organized. When the hologram faded, the cube opened like a flower. Inside were dozens of data crystals, each one containing detailed information about different aspects of galactic civilization. The ambassador's final words echoed in the small space. We await your response within 30 standard rotations. Commander Rivera immediately contacted Earth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every major government wanted the cube transported to their territory. The military demanded security protocols. Scientists insisted on immediate analysis. Corporate leaders began discussing patent rights and licensing agreements within 6 hours. The small space station had become the center of the most important event in human history. Mission Control in Houston coordinated with facilities in Moscow, Beijing, London, and Tokyo. Everyone wanted access to the alien technology. Dr. Rodriguez watched the feeding frenzy with growing concern. The aliens had clearly expected a unified response from a single planetary government. Instead, they were getting dozens of different groups, each with their own agenda and priorities. The first major disagreement came when the Chinese delegation insisted the cube should be studied in their facilities, while the Americans demanded it remain in international space. The Russians wanted military analysis first. The Europeans pushed for civilian scientific study. The Japanese proposed a joint commercial venture. Meanwhile, hackers around the world began attempting to crack the data crystals. Tech companies reverse-engineered the cube's materialization technology. Military analysts studied the holographic projection systems. Everyone was trying to gain some advantage from humanity's first contact with alien civilization. Dr. Rodriguez realized that the 30-day deadline was going to be a problem. The Confederation clearly expected a formal, diplomatic response from Earth's leadership. What they were going to get was chaos. The first response messages started going out within days. The United Nations sent a formal diplomatic note accepting the invitation and requesting more information. The United States military sent a separate message asking for weapon specifications and defensive capabilities. The European Union proposed a trade agreement. China offered to share human technology in exchange for advanced alien science. Private companies began sending their own messages. Tech billionaires offered to purchase exclusive distribution rights for alien technology. Entertainment. Companies wanted to secure rights to alien cultural content. Tourism agencies proposed vacation packages to other worlds. Religious leaders sent messages about human spirituality and the nature of consciousness. Scientists shared human knowledge about physics, biology, and mathematics. Artists transmitted examples of human creativity and culture. By the end of the first week, over 200 different messages had been transmitted to the coordinates the ambassador had provided. Each sender believed they were representing humanity's interests. None of them had coordinated with the others. The Confederation's response came faster than expected. Ambassador Quillen appeared again, this time looking somewhat confused. Being explained that they had received multiple conflicting messages from Earth. Some claimed to represent the entire planet while others represented smaller groups. The variety of responses was unprecedented in their experience. Dr. Rodriguez realized that humanity had already begun causing problems. The aliens were clearly used to dealing with unified planetary governments. The concept of dozens of different nations, corporations, and organizations all claiming to speak for the same species was apparently foreign to them. The situation escalated when various human groups began sending follow-up messages, each one trying to clarify their authority and legitimacy. The military sent detailed explanations of Earth's defense structure. Politicians sent information about democratic governance. Business leaders explained free market economics. Scientists shared human research methodologies. Ambassador Quillen's next message was shorter and more direct. The Confederation was having difficulty understanding Earth's political structure. They requested that humanity select a single representative group for formal negotiations. The meeting would take place in the Proxima Centauri system in 60 days. The response to this request created an even bigger problem. Every major world power insisted they should lead the delegation. The United Nations claimed authority as the official representative of all nations. Individual countries argued they had the right to represent their own citizens. Corporations demanded seats at the negotiating table. Dr. Rodriguez watched the political maneuvering with growing alarm. The aliens had made a simple request that humanity seemed incapable of fulfilling. The invitation that should have been humanity's greatest opportunity was turning into its greatest challenge. The cube continued to pulse with soft blue light, a reminder that somewhere in the galaxy an ancient civilization was waiting for Earth's response. What they were going to get was something no species in the Confederation had ever encountered before: the complete, unfiltered chaos of human civilization. The invitation had been extended with the best of intentions. Neither humanity nor the Galactic Confederation understood what they had just started. The massive conference room aboard the Confederation flagship had been designed for dignity and order. Polished metal walls reflected soft lighting, while the central table could accommodate delegates from dozens of different species. Ambassador Quillen had prepared for this moment according to protocols that had worked successfully for over 3,000 years. 23. Human ships approached the designated meeting point in the Proxima system. The Confederation had expected one diplomatic vessel carrying a small delegation. Instead, they found themselves hosting representatives from every major Earth government, 3 multinational corporations, 2 military alliances, and the United Nations. Commander Rivera stepped forward as the designated spokesperson, but his authority was immediately challenged by General Patricia Thompson of the Global Defense Initiative. She insisted that military matters required military leadership. Corporate Representative David Park interrupted both of them, claiming that economic considerations were paramount. Dr. Maya Singh from the International Science Consortium demanded that scientific exchange take priority over politics. Ambassador Quillen watched this display with growing confusion. The Confederation's experience with new species followed predictable patterns. Initial fear gave way to cautious cooperation, followed by gradual integration into galactic society. The process typically took decades and required careful management. Of cultural differences, humanity was rewriting the rules from the first moment. The formal greeting ceremony began with traditional Confederation protocols. Each species was expected to present their credentials, acknowledge the authority of the Council, and express gratitude for the opportunity to join galactic civilization. The humans listened politely, then began asking questions that hadn't been considered in millennia. Dr. Singh wanted to know why faster-than-light travel was limited to certain routes. Her mathematical analysis suggested that the Confederation's hyperspace network was operating at only 60% efficiency. She proposed improvements that would revolutionize galactic transportation. General Thompson requested detailed specifications for Confederation military vessels. She claimed this information was necessary for defensive planning, but her questions revealed a tactical mind that was already analyzing potential weaknesses in alien ship designs. David Park offered to establish trade agreements that would benefit both civilizations. His proposals were technically legal under Confederation law, but they exploited loopholes that had never been considered. The economic implications were staggering. The situation became more complex when the human delegates began conducting separate negotiations with different Confederation member species. The Vorthan delegation was fascinated by human reproductive diversity and began asking personal questions that violated several diplomatic protocols. The Kelari were intrigued by human cultural ceremonies and requested detailed explanations of birthday parties and weddings. The Thraxians, a species known for their engineering expertise, found themselves in deep discussion with human technicians about safety protocols. The humans' insistence on redundant systems and failure analysis was completely foreign to Thraxian thinking, but the concepts were undeniably effective. Ambassador Quillen realized that the carefully planned first contact session was spiraling out of control. The humans were somehow managing to have meaningful conversations with multiple species simultaneously, while completely ignoring established diplomatic procedures. The crisis deepened when human military personnel began scanning Confederation vessels with unauthorized sensor equipment. When confronted, they claimed they were conducting routine security assessments. The scans revealed design flaws that Confederation engineers had missed for centuries. Dr. Singh's team had somehow gained access to the flagship's computer systems. They claimed they were only trying to establish communication protocols, but their activities had resulted in a 15% improvement in processing efficiency. The ship's AI was now running better than it had in decades. The corporate representatives were equally disruptive. They had established trading relationships with 3 different species, proposed joint ventures with 2 others, and somehow negotiated preliminary agreements for technology licensing. All of this happened during coffee breaks between official sessions. The most disturbing development was the humans' effect on other species. The Bractari, a warrior civilization that had been carefully contained through diplomatic isolation, were fascinated by human military history. They began requesting detailed information about Earth's conflicts and tactical innovations. The Yolani, known for their rigid social structure, were asking questions about human labor practices and worker rights. The concept of collective bargaining was completely alien to them, but they seemed to find it compelling. The Zentari delegation was particularly interested in human political systems. The idea that leadership could change through peaceful elections was revolutionary to a species that had maintained the same ruling class for millennia. Ambassador Quillen called for a recess after the 3rd day of meetings. The simple first contact protocol had become the most complex diplomatic situation in Confederation history. The humans had somehow managed to establish relationships with 17 different species while simultaneously challenging fundamental assumptions about galactic civilization. The final complication came when the humans refused to leave. They insisted on thoroughly documenting everything they had learned. Their scientific teams wanted to study every piece of technology they had encountered. Their military advisors requested detailed briefings on galactic security threats. Their business representatives demanded copies of all trade agreements and economic data. What should have been a brief welcome ceremony had become an intensive cultural exchange program that nobody had planned for. The humans were treating first contact like a comprehensive fact-finding mission rather than a diplomatic formality. The Confederation's careful protocols assumed that new species would be grateful for inclusion and willing to accept guidance from their more advanced neighbors. Humanity was approaching membership as an opportunity to improve everything they encountered. Ambassador Quillen filed the most unusual report in Confederation history. The humans had not violated any laws or treaties, They had simply approached first contact with an energy and curiosity that was completely unprecedented. They were asking questions that challenged basic assumptions about how galactic civilization should function, the invitation that was meant to begin a standard integration process had instead introduced variables that the Confederation had never encountered. The humans were not just joining galactic civilization, they were already beginning to change it. The meeting that should have taken hours had lasted 3 days. The humans had established relationships with multiple species, identified improvements to established systems, and somehow managed to conduct successful negotiations while completely ignoring diplomatic protocol. The first contact protocols that had worked for thousands of years were clearly inadequate for dealing with humanity. The Confederation would need to develop new approaches, and quickly. The humans were not going to wait for permission to start changing things. The first signs of change appeared in the outer rim territories where human traders had established their initial business relationships. What started as simple commercial exchanges quickly evolved into something more complex and disruptive. The Confederation's monitoring stations began receiving reports of unusual activities. Across multiple sectors, Commander Lisa Reynolds had been assigned to work with the Bractari military as part of a cultural exchange program. The Bractari were a warrior species that had been diplomatically isolated for centuries due to their aggressive nature. The Confederation maintained peace by carefully limiting their expansion and military capabilities. Lisa's first presentation to the Bractari High Command was meant to be a routine briefing on human military history. Instead, it became a revolutionary moment that changed everything. She shared tactical innovations from Earth's conflicts. Focusing on adaptive strategies and flexible command structures, the Bractari had always relied on brute force in overwhelming numbers. Lisa introduced concepts like strategic deception, mobile warfare, and combined arms tactics. Within weeks, Bractari military effectiveness had increased by 300%. Their traditional enemies were unprepared for these new approaches. The Confederation's peacekeeping forces suddenly found themselves dealing with a dozen territorial disputes as the Bractari began expanding into regions they had never been able to conquer. The careful balance of power that had maintained stability for centuries was collapsing. Meanwhile, in the core worlds, Dr. Robert Kim was working with the Yulani on organizational psychology research. The Yulani society was built on rigid hierarchies and absolute obedience to authority. Workers performed their assigned tasks without question, and social mobility was virtually impossible. Dr. Kim's research introduced concepts that were completely alien to Yulani thinking. He explained human ideas about job satisfaction, personal fulfillment, and work-life balance. The Yulani found these concepts fascinating but disturbing. The first Yulani labor strike in recorded history began in a manufacturing facility on their homeworld. Workers demanded better conditions, more flexible schedules, and the right to change jobs. The strike spread to other facilities, then to other planets. Within months, the entire Yulani civilization was experiencing social upheaval. Their production efficiency, which had been the foundation of their economic success, dropped by 40%. The Confederation's supply chains, which depended on Yulani manufacturing, began experiencing critical shortages. The technological disruption was equally significant. Human engineer Amy Foster had been working with Thraxian manufacturers to improve their transportation systems. The Thraxians were master engineers, but they had never considered the possibility that their designs could be fundamentally improved. Amy's modifications increased efficiency by 400% while reducing energy consumption by half. The improvements were so dramatic that existing galactic infrastructure became obsolete overnight. The Confederation faced a choice between rebuilding their entire transportation network or watching human-influenced systems dominate galactic commerce. The economic implications were staggering. Human merchant Tom Bradley had discovered that Confederation trade regulations contained loopholes that had existed for millennia. He wasn't breaking any laws, but his business practices were generating profits that seemed impossible under traditional economic models. Bradley's success inspired other human entrepreneurs to explore similar opportunities. They found weaknesses in currency exchange systems, inefficiencies in supply chain management, and untapped markets that had been ignored for centuries. Human businesses began outcompeting established galactic corporations not through superior technology, but through superior thinking. The cultural contamination was perhaps the most disturbing development. Human entertainment programming had begun broadcasting across galactic networks. The Prothean Empire, known for their stoic philosophy and rigid social control, was experiencing their first cultural revolution after exposure to human comedy. The concept of humor was completely foreign to Prothean society. They had never developed the ability to find situations amusing or to use laughter as a social bonding mechanism. Human comedy shows introduced ideas that undermined their entire worldview. Prothean citizens began questioning authority figures, making jokes about government policies and expressing individual opinions. The Empire's carefully maintained social order was collapsing as people learned to laugh at things they had previously accepted without question. The Confederation Council held emergency sessions as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The human influence was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't conquest or coercion, but something more subtle and more dangerous. Other species were finding human ideas compelling and adopting them. Voluntarily, the Zentari had declared independence from their traditional client status and established direct trade relationships with Earth. The Haxoid Collective, known for their hive mind structure, was experimenting with individual consciousness after exposure to human psychology texts. The Kalari were abandoning their traditional ceremonies in favor of human-style celebrations. The Vorthan were questioning their reproductive practices. After learning about human family structures, the Thraxians were redesigning their entire civilization based on human safety protocols. Ambassador Quillen found himself at the center of a crisis that had no precedent in Confederation history. The humans weren't conquering anyone or forcing their ideas on other species. They were simply sharing their knowledge and perspectives, and other civilizations were choosing to adopt human approaches. The problem was that human ideas were often incompatible with existing galactic systems. The Confederation had maintained stability through careful balance and gradual change. Human influence was creating rapid transformation that threatened to destroy everything they had built. The military situation was deteriorating rapidly. Human strategic advisor Colonel James Walker had been assigned to work with Confederation defense forces. His analysis of their tactical doctrines had revealed critical vulnerabilities that had existed for centuries. Walker's recommendations for improvement were sound, but implementing them required restructuring military hierarchies that had remained unchanged for millennia. The reorganization created confusion and conflict throughout the Confederation's armed forces. The economic disruption was equally severe. Human economist Dr. Jennifer Walsh had published research suggesting that the Confederation's regulated scarcity model was fundamentally flawed. Her theories about abundance-based economics challenged basic assumptions about resource allocation and wealth distribution. Several species had begun experimenting with human-style free market systems. The results were chaotic but impressive. Production increased dramatically, but traditional power structures were being destroyed in the process. The Confederation leadership realized they faced an unprecedented challenge. The humans weren't enemies who could be fought or defeated. They were allies who were inadvertently destroying galactic civilization through the simple act of being themselves, the invitation that was meant to add one more compliant member to. The Confederation had instead introduced a catalyst that was transforming the entire galaxy. The humans were not adapting to galactic civilization, they were forcing it to adapt to them. The ripple effects were accelerating. Every human idea that was adopted by another species created new problems and opportunities. The carefully ordered structure of galactic society was being replaced by something more dynamic and unpredictable. The question was no longer whether the Confederation could contain human influence. The question was whether galactic civilization could survive the transformation that humanity was causing simply by existing. The emergency session of the Confederation High Council convened in the ancient chambers of the core world capital. Representatives from 300 species gathered to address what historians would later call the human crisis. The discussion that followed would determine the fate of galactic civilization. Chancellor Vex of the Thaxian Assembly called for immediate containment measures. He proposed restricting human movement throughout the galaxy and limiting their access to sensitive information. The proposal had significant support from species that were experiencing internal upheaval due to human influence. The containment protocols were comprehensive and legally sound. Humans would be confined to designated sectors, their communications monitored, and their cultural exchanges carefully regulated. The measures were designed to prevent further contamination of galactic society, while allowing existing human-alien relationships to continue under supervision. The plan might have worked if human diplomat Rachel Green hadn't been monitoring the proceedings through the Galactic Information Network. She immediately published the containment protocols along with a detailed analysis of their implications. Her report, titled "The Confederation's Fear of Freedom," spread across the galaxy within hours. The publication created an immediate crisis. Species that had never questioned Confederation authority suddenly found themselves reading about restrictions, monitoring, and cultural containment. The idea that the government was afraid of ideas was completely foreign to most galactic citizens. The first protests began on the Yelani homeworld, where workers were already experiencing labor unrest. The protests spread to other worlds as different. Species began questioning why their government was so afraid of human influence. The Confederation found itself facing the first pan-galactic civil rights movement in recorded history. The Zentari formally declared independence from Confederation oversight and established a mutual defense pact with Earth. The Haxoid Collective began experimenting with individual voting rights after exposure to human democratic principles. The Kalari started demanding representation in Confederation decision-making processes. Military advisor Colonel James Walker had been working with Confederation Defense Forces when the containment protocols were announced. His response was swift and devastating. He published a complete analysis of Confederation military weaknesses, including strategic vulnerabilities that had existed for centuries. Walker's report was framed as a public service document designed to help the Confederation improve their defensive capabilities. The military analysis was accurate and helpful, but it also revealed information that several hostile species had been trying to obtain for decades. The publication created panic in military circles. Walker had identified critical flaws in their defense networks, logistical vulnerabilities in their supply chains, and tactical weaknesses in their command structures. The information was now available to anyone with access to the Galactic Communication Network. The Confederation's response was to implement the military recommendations immediately, but this created new problems. The restructuring required changing hierarchies that had remained stable for millennia. Military personnel who had spent centuries in the same positions suddenly found themselves reassigned or retrained. The chaos in military ranks was compounded by the ongoing social upheaval. The Prothean Empire was experiencing its first constitutional crisis after exposure to human political theory. The concept of democratic representation was spreading through their society despite government attempts to contain it. Dr. Patricia Morgan's research team had been studying Confederation governmental structures when the containment protocols were announced. Their response was to publish a comprehensive analysis of galactic political systems. The research paper, titled "Democratic Efficiency in Galactic Governance," became the most downloaded document in Confederation history. The paper demonstrated that human-style democratic processes could improve governmental decision-making efficiency by several orders of magnitude. The mathematical analysis was irrefutable, but the implications were revolutionary. The research suggested that the Confederation's governing structure was fundamentally flawed. 17 different worlds experienced constitutional crises as their populations demanded political reforms based on human democratic principles. The Confederation Council found itself dealing with independence movements, democratic revolutions and civil rights protests simultaneously, the economic disruption continued to accelerate. Human businesses had established trade relationships throughout the galaxy, and their success was inspiring other species to adopt similar approaches. Traditional galactic corporations were being outcompeted by companies that used human business practices. The Confederation's regulated economy was based on controlled scarcity and managed competition. Human entrepreneurs had introduced concepts like market disruption, innovative pricing, and consumer-focused service that were completely foreign to established business practices. The result was an economic transformation that benefited consumers while destroying traditional power structures. Species that had never had choices were suddenly facing dozens of options for every product and service. The change was popular with ordinary citizens but devastating to established elites. Cultural contamination reached critical levels when human entertainment programming began influencing artistic expression throughout the galaxy. The Kalari abandoned their traditional ceremonies in favor of human-style celebrations. The Vorthan began experimenting with individual creative expression after exposure to human art. The most significant development was the emergence of hybrid cultures that combined human and alien approaches to social organization. The Thraxians had redesigned their entire civilization based on human safety protocols, but they had done so in ways that were uniquely Thraxian. The Yilani were developing new forms of social organization that combined human democratic principles with their traditional respect for expertise and experience. The result was a governmental system that was more effective than either human or Yilani approaches alone. Ambassador Quillen realized that the Confederation was facing an existential crisis. The choice was no longer between containment and integration. The choice was between evolution and dissolution. The humans were not trying to conquer or control galactic civilization. They were simply sharing their knowledge and perspectives, and other species were choosing to adopt human approaches because they found them compelling and effective. The problem was that human ideas were often incompatible with existing galactic systems. The Confederation had maintained stability through careful balance and gradual change. Human influence was creating rapid transformation that threatened to destroy everything they had built. The solution, if one existed, would require fundamental changes to how galactic civilization functioned. The rigid hierarchies and established protocols that had governed the Confederation for millennia would need to be replaced by something more flexible and adaptive. The humans had demonstrated that better solutions were always possible. The question was whether the Confederation could learn to embrace change rather than fear it. The containment protocols had failed not because they were poorly designed, but because they were based on the assumption that human influence was something to be feared rather than understood. The real challenge was learning to adapt to a galaxy where continuous improvement was possible. The crisis was reaching a tipping point. The Confederation could either find a way to incorporate human approaches into their existing systems or watch their civilization fragment as individual species chose human-influenced alternatives. The invitation that had started as a simple diplomatic gesture had become a catalyst for the most significant transformation in galactic history. The outcome would determine whether the galaxy would emerge stronger or collapse under the weight of too much change too quickly. The transformation of galactic civilization took exactly 13 months from first contact to completion. The speed of change was unprecedented in recorded history, but the results were undeniable. The rigid structure of the Confederation had evolved into something entirely new and surprisingly effective. The final Confederation Council meeting was held on Earth, in a gesture that symbolized the complete reversal of expectations. What had begun as humanity joining galactic civilization had become galactic civilization learning from humanity. The ancient chambers of the core world capital were replaced by a conference facility in Geneva that could accommodate the diverse needs of hundreds of different species. Ambassador Quillen, now serving as the first director of interspecies adaptation, addressed the assembled delegates. The title was new, created to acknowledge that constant change had become the natural state of galactic society. The old system of fixed protocols and unchanging hierarchies had given way to dynamic adaptation. "We invited humanity to join our civilization," Quillen announced to the gathered representatives. "We did not anticipate that they would transform it entirely. The galaxy is now more complex, more dynamic, and more unpredictable than ever before. It is also more alive." The new governmental structure that emerged was called the Galactic Cooperative. The name reflected the fundamental shift from hierarchical control to collaborative problem-solving. Representative Sam Foster, serving as Earth's primary diplomatic coordinator, had worked with reformed alien leadership to create systems that incorporated the best elements of hundreds of different approaches to organization. The cooperative operated through a network of specialized councils, each focused on specific aspects of galactic society. The military council included representatives from warrior species like the Bractari, alongside human strategists and Confederation peacekeepers. The economic council brought together human entrepreneurs, Yolani manufacturers, and traditional galactic traders. The cultural council was perhaps the most innovative development. It included artists, philosophers, and social scientists from every member species. Their mandate was to facilitate cultural exchange while preserving the unique characteristics that made each civilization valuable. The military had evolved into something resembling a rapid response force rather than a traditional defense organization. General Mike Torres worked with alien specialists to create flexible strategies that could adapt to any threat. The old system of territorial boundaries and static defense positions had been replaced by mobile units capable of responding to problems anywhere in the galaxy. The transformation was paradoxical. The galaxy was more militarized than ever before, with higher defense spending and more sophisticated weapon systems. At the same time, it was more peaceful, with fewer conflicts and more effective conflict resolution mechanisms. The key insight was that human-style adaptive defense was more effective than traditional static defense. The Confederation's old approach had been to prevent problems through careful control and limitation. The new approach was to develop the capability to solve problems quickly when they arose. Trade had become a complex web of cooperative agreements that somehow managed to benefit everyone involved. Human economist Dr. Jennifer Walsh's theories about mutually beneficial complexity had replaced the old system of regulated scarcity. The result was unprecedented prosperity throughout the galaxy. The Yolani had returned to full production capacity, but their workers now enjoyed flexible schedules and career mobility. The Thraxians had redesigned their manufacturing systems to incorporate human safety protocols, resulting in higher quality products and happier workers. The Bractari had channeled their warrior culture into competitive sports and exploration rather than conquest. The cultural exchange programs had evolved into something that defied easy description. Human artists worked with alien counterparts to create hybrid forms of expression that none of their species could have developed alone. The galaxy was experiencing a renaissance of creativity and innovation. The Prothean Empire had become a constitutional monarchy that combined their traditional respect for wisdom with human democratic principles. The Zentauri had developed a form of representative government that balanced individual rights with collective responsibility. The Haxoid Collective had learned to incorporate individual creativity into their group decision-making processes. The most significant change was the acceptance of continuous improvement as a fundamental principle of galactic civilization. The old Confederation had valued stability and tradition. The new cooperative embraced change as an opportunity for growth. Human influence had not destroyed galactic civilization. It had inspired it to become something greater than anyone had imagined possible. The chaos that humanity had introduced was not destruction but transformation. The technical achievements were impressive. The transportation network that Amy Foster had redesigned was now 40% more efficient than the original Confederation system. The military reforms that Colonel Walker had proposed had created defense capabilities that were more effective than anything the galaxy had seen before. The economic innovations that human entrepreneurs had introduced had generated wealth that was being shared more equitably than ever before. The political reforms that human diplomats had suggested had created governments that were more responsive to citizen needs while maintaining the stability necessary for interstellar cooperation. The cultural exchanges had produced art, music, and literature that enriched every participating civilization. The scientific collaborations had led to breakthroughs in physics, biology, and engineering that advanced the knowledge of all species. The success was not without challenges. The rapid pace of change had created stress and uncertainty for many individuals who preferred the predictability of the old system. Some species had struggled to adapt to the new approaches, requiring extensive support and patience from their neighbors. The solution had been to make adaptation itself adaptive. The cooperative had developed systems for helping species and individuals adjust to change at their own pace. The goal was not to force uniformity, but to create conditions where diversity could flourish. The most important lesson was that different approaches to the same problem could coexist and even complement each other. Human democracy worked alongside Yelani expertise-based governance. Bractari warrior culture enhanced rather than threatened Confederation peacekeeping. Thraxian engineering precision was improved by human safety innovation. The galaxy had learned to celebrate differences rather than fear them. The old system had maintained order through careful separation and limited interaction. The new system created stability through integration and mutual support. Ambassador Quillen's final report to the historical archives captured the essence of what had happened. The humans had not conquered the galaxy through force or deception. They had inspired it to evolve through the simple act of sharing their knowledge and perspectives. The invitation that had started as a routine diplomatic gesture had become the catalyst for the most significant transformation in galactic history. The Confederation had expected to gain one more compliant member. Instead, they had discovered that their entire civilization could be improved. The galaxy that emerged from this transformation was more complex, more diverse, and more dynamic than anything that had existed before. It was also more resilient, more creative, and more capable of solving problems that had seemed impossible under the old system. The humans had turned an invitation into total galactic chaos, but the chaos had revealed possibilities that no one had imagined. The galaxy was now ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Armed with the knowledge that better solutions were always possible, the new galactic order was not an ending, but a beginning. The transformation that humanity had catalyzed would continue as long as species remained willing to learn from each other and embrace the possibility of positive change.